Ahead of the programme, I spoke to Boreham Wood chairman Danny Hunter and began by asking him if he thought the season would start next Saturday.
I've got to take it as a yes. There's a caveat in the last correspondence from the chief exec that sort of puts in there that there is a sort of subject to change thing dependent on conversations with government. But as far as I'm concerned, I think the season for ourselves will start in Wrexham on October the 3rd, and I expect every National League Premier club to be playing. I mean, I know the clubs at Step 2 are playing in the FA Cup that day. Whether that alters things, from their perspective, I don't know. But we'll be starting on October the 3rd, I'm sure. I can certainly see legal challenges coming very, very quickly, if not.
So the caveat is from the National League, if they get confirmation of this funding from the government, it looks like the ship has sailed on fans being back in stadiums, at least for the time being, doesn't it? So it's all really based on whether or not the government come up with enough money that clubs are happy to get going. And the sort of figures of, between £3 and £4 million a month that's being lost by the National League, that sort of money that is needed. That's a lot of government money to help non-league football, isn't it? As much as I'm a non-league fan and you're a non-league chairman and a fan of the sport, £3 to £4 million a month is a lot of government money to help non-league football.
It's more than a lot of money, and it has to be justified. And it's no point people saying we have to have government money to start. We have to help ourselves first and foremost. We must see every assistance that we get, whether it's furlough, whether it's a job retention scheme, whatever it is, we have to see that as assistance and as a bonus. It's suddenly, there seems to be expectation everywhere that this is a government problem. This is a football problem. It's a non-league football problem, as much as it is a Premier League problem and a government problem. We've all been heavily assisted since March with furlough, and suddenly that seems to be being forgotten. So we've got to be very, very, very sure of some of the things that we're saying, because the last thing we want to do is alienate non-league football fans. And as you've just said, you're a non-league football fan, and you're starting to question those sums. So we've got to be very, very sure before we start issuing ultimatums. The first thing we've got to do is let's get playing football. Let's give our supporters a streaming service, and hopefully people can get behind that and support it in the best way possible. And I'll leave it to the powers that be and the government to work out if there can be any assistance. And if we are getting some assistance, we've got to be enormously grateful for it. And we cannot see that as an expectation. There's an awful lot of people out there, that are struggling with, to pay for school uniforms for the kids, and they're struggling, they're out of work. So we've got to be very, very careful about, what we wish for and how we go about expressing that.
But if you're a club like, I don't know, like a Notts County or a Barnet or a club like that, and you're being told by the government that you're not allowed fans into the ground, can they not quite rightly say, well, if the government are preventing us from having thousands of fans in our ground, then the government should cover the money that's being lost because of that?
I think the government aren't saying that, are they? The government are saying it's not safe to do so. There can be the argument that there's an hypocrisy in terms of Step 3 and below, that you can have 500 or 600 supporters in the ground, that you can't have, a proportional amount of supporters in your ground at, say, Notts County or a Barnet, based on, their safety levels and their stewarding will be superior to those in, say, Step 5 or Step 6 of the non-league pyramid. There's lots of other arguments you can have. Government saying that you can't have people in stadiums as a safety concern to keep the nation safe, it is a difficult one to argue. As I say, I think the hypocrisy might be that, perhaps Notts County, Barnet, Boreham Wood would be able to socially distance, keep safe and manage its stadiums perhaps slightly better through budgets and everything else, and perhaps, as I say, clubs at step 3, 4, 5, and 6. I think you can argue on that at that level and on that basis, but I'm not sure you can argue, when you're talking about the health of the nation and COVID cases rising to, which I would expect to be by the end of next week, above 10,000 or above. And I think, again, we have to be balanced.
And it's this elite tag, isn't it, that on the National League and the National League North and South that's causing this situation? Because you're right in what you're saying. Of course, logically, 600 fans inside, for example, Kings Langley, Biggleswade Town, Cheshire United, are going to be closer together than 600 fans inside Notts County or Boreham Wood or Barnet. But because of this sort of elite tag, the National League has been put in a group with the Premier League and the EFL, and that's what's preventing fans from being allowed at the moment. I gather there's some consideration of maybe dropping that elite label or looking at doing that for at least step 2, but then that would probably mean no government support going forward, and maybe that is a more sustainable way of looking at things at the moment, to try and have that government support rather than relying on fans that could be stopped at any time.
Well, the National League at times want to run with the horses and chase with the hounds. And, if we want to be called elite sport, you need to go back to what was being said in the summer. We were elite sport, according to Michael Tattersall in the National League, and we were going to align ourselves with the EFL. And then if you remember, the Step 2 clubs were told they weren't elite sport, and as such, there would be no playoffs. Then the likes of Dorking and York and Havant argued that they were elite sport, and the MPs and that got involved, and that was overturned. So 1 minute filed were reprieved with Ebbsfleet and Chorley, and 2 days later they were relegated, and the playoffs were held at step 2. Now, the rights and wrongs of that are for the leagues to discuss and the clubs to discuss. I didn't really see that as a huge government issue. It was more a case of how did the league and the clubs see that. Now you see, I think on a personal basis, I see that the majority of Step 1 clubs in the National Premier League are elite clubs. We're professional football clubs. Our players derive their living from the game. There's an awful lot of Step 2 that train on a Tuesday, Thursday night. They're postmen, plumbers, carpenters, labourers, whatever it is, bus drivers, etc. during the day, and they train on a Tuesday, Thursday night. So again, there has to be sensible conversation at Step 2 level in the north and in the south to see what actually is the real truth, and that's where proper consultation with the league board, the managers, the chairman and the owners needs to take place, because of course there's going to be one or two at that level that train full time. I would imagine the Yorks and that in the north, and perhaps Havants and that in the south. But in the main, most of the clubs will train on Tuesday and Thursday nights. Most of the players will have jobs, and football will be their secondary job. And so there needs to be a balance and a different argument, I think, and a different way of looking at Step 2 to Step 1. But Step 1 needs to start on October the 3rd. In our case, we're going to a non-league giant, but it's also the giant of an ex-football league club in Wrexham. And nobody would argue that Wrexham aren't part of elite sport.
Yeah, it does feel like there's a bit of a split between Step 1 and Step 2 in the National League at the moment. It feels like, anyway, and we saw that sort of open letter from the National League North sides, that Step 2 aren't perhaps in a position to start playing football without fans or without funding, whereas lots of National League sides, it sounds like you're in this position, you're already paying players, you're already paying staff, whether you're playing or not, so it makes sense to get going and to start playing football.
Well, there's still enough time for the league and the board and the north and the south to get in a room and to discuss what's best for that particular level. Because if, for instance, that level could align itself to perhaps Step 3, etc., they may be allowed to have supporters in. But I think the worry then is when that, because if this, I think if the virus keeps spiking and keeps gathering pace, you'll probably find that crowds will be stopped at step 3 and below's level very shortly anyway. So there's a whole anomaly of trials and tribulations we're all going to have to overcome. As I say, the most important thing for me is that the consultation process. It should have started months ago, and it seems as if we muddle our way through, and it's everything sort of lastminute.com, and I don't feel it needs to be that way. I mean, for instance, while the league is in consultation with the government, most importantly, it also needs to be in consultation with its member clubs. And I don't see that one is exclusive to the other. I think these things can be happening at the same time, because there's a lot of smart guys at step 2 level, and there's a lot of smart people at step 1. And as I say, I'll always maintain the board and its chief executive is there to serve its member clubs, and even keeping us informed with how the talks are going with government would be a step forward. As I say, at this point, I've had no consultation with the chief exec other than the things I'm hearing through my manager, or I've had one bit of correspondence that was sent through OLLIE, which I'm sure you've already seen, with the caveat that we are starting on October the 3rd, but there is a slight caveat in there that it could change its mind dependent on talks with government. So in that regard, you're as much in the light or as much in the dark as I am.
I wouldn't want to be in the shoes of the National League Board. Certainly since March, it's not been easy, has it, for them or for the EFL or for anyone involved in football administration. But how do you think they've handled the last 6 months?
As I say, I think there's been mixed messages. I mean, I've had, I've listened to opinion that we're not playing football this side of Christmas to we start the playoffs in 3 weeks' time, all in the space of a 10-day period. So at the end of the day, sometimes, I mean, my mother always taught me less said, best mended, which would probably surprise you, seeing as I do have an opinion on these type of things. But the truth of the matter is sometimes, as I say, there is some learned people. I think the one thing I'd say, everybody on that board is trying to do the right thing. The chief exec will be trying to do the right thing. But there's 67, 68 clubs that, as I say, they have to find a way to keep their community clubs afloat. And no disrespect, if Boreham Wood goes under in the next 2 or 3 months, everybody will remember Boreham Wood Football Club in our community, went under the stewardship of Danny Hunter. No one will remember Michael Tattersall's name or who the board members were. So we've got to keep a balance, as I say. We know the board are doing their best. We know the chief executive's doing their best. But that doesn't always mean to say that their best actually knows what's best for 67 clubs. That's why consultation with all those clubs is very, very important, because one hat will not fit all, and it never would when you've got that. We're talking about the length and breadth of the country. We're talking about different regions with different issues, and we're dealing with clubs that have enormous fan bases and clubs which have very different and small fan bases. And as such, that's why opinion and diversity is so important, because non-league, let's be very, very clear, is an enormous part of the football structure and the football pyramid. It needs to survive. And for it to survive, it needs everybody playing its part. But it does need consultation, and it doesn't need individuals at board level perhaps thinking it knows better than as I say, the owners and the chairman of these clubs, because they're going to bed with the problems every day of the week, and often waking up in the middle of the night in cold sweats, I would think.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's not easy owning a football club at the best of times, but at the moment, you're right in what you're saying. That sort of weight of pressure of players and it's jobs, it's coaches, it's the community, it's fans, it's everything on the shoulders of those trying to run football, and especially those that are owning football clubs. Do you think there is a real risk that we might lose some clubs in the National League over the next couple of months if things aren't sorted in terms of funding?
I think there's an enormous risk of that, but I think there's an enormous risk of that, even in normal circumstances. I think we've got to be very, very thankful and grateful for the furlough scheme for non-league football. It wasn't something that we could have budgeted for in the previous season when the government brought that in, but it has been an enormous help, and we must acknowledge that, And as we go into this next phase, I suppose I don't know whether we'd call this a second rise in the pandemic or whatever which way we choose to term it. Whatever which way we go, we're going to need our supporters, we're going to need our staff, we're going to need everybody to understand the new normal is going to have a difference. There may be times when during this whole season it may need to shut down for 3 weeks. We don't know. Remember, we've just lost the good weather. We're very early. Sort of in the in the autumn or as the winter approaches, and we've got to look at how might this look in January, how might this look in March. The league's already been, we were told we were elite sport, and elite sport has already started. We were told that step 2 wasn't was elite sport, and so they can't have the crowds in like step 3. There's lots and lots of different factors where we need to look back, learn from our mistakes. I mean, on a personal note, I would say step 2, and I don't mean this to be disrespectful to anyone, maybe needs to look at itself and decide whether it is elite sport in the main, and step 1 needs to accept it is elite sport, and I think that from there the board can have proper talks with the clubs, because I think what you alluded to earlier was the 81% of northern of the national north are saying that they don't feel ready to start the league at this point. Is that correct?
That was what they put in an open letter to Michael Tattersall on Thursday. I think it was that 81% of those clubs aren't ready to get going if they haven't got any sort of financial support.
Then I suppose that the league has to listen to that. It'd be interesting to see how the South would go on. I certainly don't think it would be as high as 81% if the people were speaking to the South. But I think if you spoke to the national league clubs, almost 100% would call themselves elite. That they were part of elite sport, and as elite sport has already started. The EFL's already started. As I say, I think we do have to go back to, we need to start on October the 3rd, and there just needs a lot more discussion between the North, the South and the board.
Well, I think all of us as football fans really hope the league does start in 6 days' time, and it's not an easy start for Boreham Wood, is it? Away to Wrexham, as you've already said, and then we presume that Macclesfield Town game won't go ahead, and then it's Halifax Town. Kings Lynn have just been promoted, Solihull, Woking, Dagenham, Redbridge. It's a tricky October, but it looks like you've recruited well over the summer, and I presume you'll be hoping to sort of challenge up the right end of the table again this year.
Yeah, I mean, the hardest thing is not having supporters in the ground and seeing the supporters, but just take away everything else. For Boreham Football Club, we're a tiny club. It's also hugely exciting. Now, if we can get the streaming platform going and our support base, tuned in to giving, we know that they'll be behind us. We think we've recruited great. I mean, and remember that, years ago, we were used to going to Great Wakering Rovers away. We're going to Wrexham, we're going down there. We'll give it everything we've got, as we always do. We feel that we've got the best squad we've ever started a season with, and it's my job to to do everything I can for my community, for my town, for my supporters, and to have a social responsibility to make sure that I look after my staff, and people's safety is key. But we've also now got to look at, we've got the excitement of a new season. We want to go to the Football League. We've knocked on the door for 2 of the last 3 seasons, and so we're going to give it our best. The last thing we want to do is I think non-league needs cheering up. I really do, and I think we're at the top of the non-league pyramid, and I think that we need to lead. We need to find a way forward. Our supporters expect that. And when you look across the top of the non-league pyramid, I mean, the Notts County fans are magnificent. Chesterfield fans, Hartlepool fans, Wrexham, Stockport. You look at the level of support that's there, and we're now a part of that. Boreham Wood is now part of non-league football's elite, and we all start the season with the same aim. God loves a trier, and we're going to be trying to get into the EFL, and that goes for all of the clubs, and obviously, and I wish Macclesfield well. It's terrible what's happened to them, but again, that comes down to, I think, a club that's been mismanaged by an owner, and all we can do is wish them well.